Picture this. A giant of a man, 6'3", hands like a carpenter, a smile so wide it could light up an entire room. Every week, millions of Americans invited him into their living rooms. They watched him sandwood, crack jokes, and hug his wife like she was the most precious thing on earth. They thought they knew him. They didn't. Because behind that warm laugh and those sawdust-covered boots was a man quietly carrying something heavy. Something the cameras never caught. Something even his closest fans had no idea about. And when the truth finally came out, it stopped people cold. Ben Napier became famous for being real. In a world full of fake smiles and filtered lives, he felt different. He wasn't some polished TV personality with a stylist and a speech coach. He was a small-town guy from Laurel, Mississippi, population barely 18,000, who fixed up old houses and meant every single word he said. When Hometown first aired on HGTV in 2016, nobody expected it to blow up the way it did. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was just Ben and his wife Erin working with their hands, restoring forgotten homes, and breathing life back into a town that the rest of America had basically written off. But here's the thing about Ben Napier that most people missed. The man you saw on screen, calm, steady, always smiling, that wasn't a character. But it also wasn't the full picture. Because even the strongest people have cracks. Even the happiest faces hide storms. And for Ben Napier, the storm had been building for years. Long before the cameras. Long before the fame. Long before Hometown turned Laurel, Mississippi into a destination people actually drove hundreds of miles to visit. There were moments, quiet, private, painful moments, that shaped everything you ever saw on that screen. Moments Ben never talked about openly. Until now. And once you hear what he's been through, you'll never watch Hometown the same way again. Let's go back to the beginning. Before the TV deals. Before the magazine covers. Before tourists started flooding into Laurel, Mississippi, just to stand in front of houses that Ben and Erin renovated. Before all of that, there was just a young man with a woodworking shop, a dream that felt too big, and a bank account that told him to give up. Ben Napier grew up in Laurel with deep roots. His father was a pastor. His family was tight-knit, faith-driven, and grounded in the kind of values that don't bend easily. Ben was always the big, quiet one. The guy who worked with his hands. The guy who could look at a broken thing and see what it could become. But talent doesn't pay rent. And for a long time, Ben was struggling in ways that most of his fans today would never guess. After college, Ben started a woodworking business called Scotsman Company. He made custom furniture, signs, handcrafted pieces. Beautiful work. The kind of stuff that should have sold itself. But building a business from scratch in a small Mississippi town? That's not romantic. That's terrifying. There were months where the money barely came in. Months where Ben and Erin, newly married, deeply in love, and completely broke, had to make decisions that kept them up at night. Do we keep going? Is this dream actually worth it? Or are we just two small-town kids fooling ourselves? Most people would have quit. Ben didn't. And here's the part that almost nobody talks about. Erin was the one who first pushed the idea of a show. She had been writing a blog, documenting their life in Laurel, the houses they were slowly fixing up, the town they genuinely believed in when nobody else did. A producer saw it, made contact, and suddenly, out of nowhere, there was a conversation happening about putting their lives on national television. Ben was hesitant. This is crucial. Because Ben Napier is not a man who chases the spotlight. He never was. The idea of cameras following him around, of strangers dissecting his life, of becoming a television personality, that didn't sit right with him. He was a craftsman, a private man, a guy who just wanted to build things and live quietly with his family. But Erin believed, and Ben trusted Erin more than he trusted his own doubts. So they said yes, and everything changed. Hometown premiered in January 2016. The response was not immediate fireworks. It was slow, steady, like a fire that starts small and then catches the wind. Viewers connected with something they hadn't felt in a long time watching television. Authenticity. Ben and Erin weren't performing. They were just living. arguing gently about design choices, laughing at real moments, working until their hands hurt. And America couldn't look away. By season 2, the ratings were climbing. By season 3, Laurel, Mississippi, a town that had been quietly fading for decades, was suddenly on the map. Businesses were opening. Tourism was booming. People were moving to Laurel specifically because of what Ben and Erin had built. It was a genuine American success story. But success, real, massive, overwhelming success, always comes with a price. And Ben Napier was about to find out exactly how high that price could get. Because just as everything seemed to be going perfectly, his body started sending him warnings he couldn't ignore. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the body you relied on your entire life is quietly working against you. No dramatic collapse. No emergency room sirens. Just a slow, creeping realization that something is wrong. Something serious. Something that no amount of hard work or positive thinking can fix. That's exactly what Ben Napier faced. And when the details came out, fans were completely blindsided. Ben Napier is a big man. Always has been. 6'3", broad shoulders, built like someone who actually uses their body for a living. But size can be deceiving. And behind that powerful frame, Ben was carrying a health burden that had been silently growing for years. It was during the peak of hometown success that Ben finally opened up about his weight and the serious health concerns that came with it. This wasn't vanity. This wasn't about how he looked on camera. This was about his heart, his longevity, his ability to be there, truly be there, for Erin and their daughter Helen, who was born in 2019. Ben admitted that at his heaviest, he was in a dangerous place physically. Let that sink in for a moment. Here was a man at the absolute top of his career, a man millions of people admired and looked up to, a man who appeared strong and unshakable every single week on national television. And privately he was scared. But the weight concerns were only part of the story, because around the same time, Ben also revealed something that hit his fans even harder. He had been dealing with a condition that affected his daily life in ways that most people never saw coming from someone like him. The pressure of filming, the relentless schedule, the constant travel, the responsibility of carrying an entire town's economic revival on his shoulders, because that's essentially what hometown had become for Laurel. It wasn't just a TV show anymore. It was people's livelihoods, their businesses, their homes, their futures. And Ben felt every pound of that weight. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from physical work. Ben could handle that all day. But from emotional labor, from being the steady one, the strong one, the one who never cracks, the one who holds everything together while the world watches. Ben had been doing that for years, and the body keeps score. In interviews, Ben spoke carefully but honestly about what this period felt like. He talked about making changes, getting serious about his health, recognizing that being a good husband and father meant he had to take care of himself first, even when every instinct told him to just push through and keep working. He started making real changes, difficult changes. But here's what nobody was paying attention to while all of this was happening. While Ben was fighting his private health battles, something else was shifting behind the scenes of hometown. Something in the DNA of the show itself. Something that would eventually force Ben and Erin to make a decision that shook their entire world. The fame that had saved Laurel, Mississippi, was slowly starting to suffocate the man at the center of it. And the worst part? Ben saw it coming long before anyone else did. There's a moment in every success story that nobody talks about. The moment when everything you worked for, everything you sacrificed for, starts to feel less like a dream and more like a cage. Ben Napier reached that moment, and it was darker than anything his fans ever imagined. Think about what hometown actually became at its peak. It wasn't just a renovation show anymore. It was a cultural phenomenon, a brand, a machine that required constant feeding. New seasons, new episodes, spin-offs, merchandise, appearances, interviews, social media. The pressure to keep delivering that warm, authentic, small-town magic week after week after week, while the entire apparatus of a major television network hummed expectantly behind the scenes. HGTV didn't just have a hit show. They had a golden goose. And golden geese don't get days off. Ben Napier is, at his core, a craftsman. A man who finds peace in the slow, deliberate process of building something with his hands. He's not wired for the relentless pace of television production. He's not wired for the constant performance of public life. He never was. But fame doesn't care about what you're wired for. Fame just demands more. And here's what was really happening behind that cheerful, sawdust-covered exterior that America fell in love with. Ben was losing himself. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, the way a house foundation cracks. Quietly, invisibly, until one day you look down and realize the damage has been spreading for years. The woodworking shop that had been his sanctuary, his creative outlet, was now a filming location. The town he loved with a genuine, bone-deep passion had become a tourist destination where strangers recognized him at the grocery store, at church, at his daughter's school events. The private life he had always valued above everything else was now completely, irrevocably public. And there was no going back. People close to Ben noticed the shift. He was still showing up, still smiling, still delivering every single time the cameras rolled. Because that's who Ben Napier is. He doesn't have to do anything. When he commits completely. But commitment has a cost. In candid moments, in interviews where the PR filter slipped just slightly, Ben began dropping hints. Talking about the importance of boundaries. Mentioning how protective he felt about his family's privacy. Expressing a longing for simplicity that felt less like casual conversation and more like a man quietly pleading for his old life back. He talked about Helen, his daughter, how watching her grow up was the thing that mattered most. How he refused, absolutely refused, to let the machine of fame steal those irreplaceable moments from him. But the machine kept running. And then the spin-offs came. Hometown Takeover. Ben and Erin's dream home. More projects. More commitments. More of Ben and Erin's lives being packaged and sold to a hungry audience that could never quite get enough. On paper it looked like expansion. In reality, for Ben, it felt like drowning in slow motion. Now here's the part that really gets under your skin. Ben never complained publicly. Not once. He's not that kind of man. He's the son of a pastor. He was raised with a deep sense of gratitude and duty. Complaining about success, about a platform that had genuinely transformed his hometown and changed hundreds of lives, felt ungrateful, wrong, almost sinful. So he kept it inside. He kept smiling. He kept building. He kept showing up. Until the day came when keeping it inside was no longer an option. Because something happened. Something that forced Ben Napier to stop, reassess, and make a decision that would send shockwaves through the entire hometown universe. A breaking point so significant that even the people closest to him didn't see it coming. Every man has a limit, no matter how strong, no matter how faithful, no matter how deeply committed to the people and the purpose that drive him forward. Every man has a moment where the weight becomes too much. For Ben Napier, that moment arrived quietly, not with an explosion, not with a public meltdown, not with the kind of dramatic television-worthy breakdown that the tabloids would have loved to cover. It arrived the way the most devastating things always do, slowly, then all at once. The rumors started bubbling online around 2023. Fans noticed things, small things at first. Ben's social media had gone quieter than usual. The warm, frequent updates that followers had come to expect were becoming sporadic. There was a certain energy missing, that effortless joy that had always radiated from everything Ben posted, and the internet, being the internet, immediately started asking why. Then the speculation exploded. Was hometown getting canceled? Were Ben and Erin having problems? Was Ben sick again? Was he leaving the show? Was the whole thing, the entire beautiful, heartwarming story of two people saving a small Mississippi town, was it all about to fall apart? The comment sections went into overdrive. And HGTV stayed very, very quiet. Here's what was actually happening. Behind the polished scenes of hometown, Behind the freshly painted porches and the tearful reveals and the carefully crafted narrative of small-town American revival, there were real conversations taking place. Hard conversations. The kind that don't happen in front of cameras. Ben and Aaron were at a crossroads. Not with each other. Let's be absolutely clear about that. Their marriage, their genuine, unperformable, deeply rooted partnership, was never the issue. If anything, it was the anchor that kept Ben from going completely under during this period. The crossroads was about everything else. About how much of their lives they were willing to keep surrendering to a television network schedule. About what it meant to raise a child, and then 2 children, after their daughter, May, was born in 2021, in the middle of a fully operational media empire. About whether the version of themselves that America had fallen in love with was still who they actually were, or whether the show had quietly replaced them with polished, television-ready versions that looked the same on the outside but felt hollow within. Ben started talking about boundaries in a way that felt new, different, urgent. In one particularly telling interview, he spoke about the moment he realized that his identity had become dangerously tangled with his television persona. That Ben Napier, the HGTV star, and Ben Napier, the real human being, the carpenter, the father, the pastor's son from Laurel, had drifted so far apart that he could barely remember where one ended and the other began. That is not a small thing. That is a crisis. A quiet, private, deeply personal identity crisis playing out behind one of America's most beloved television shows. And it was taking a very real toll. There were reports, whispers from people familiar with the production, that negotiations around the show's future had become complicated. That Ben had drawn lines. That there were things he simply would not do anymore. Demands he wouldn't meet. Compromises he refused to make. Some interpreted this as difficult behavior. Ben interpreted it as survival. Because here's the truth about Ben Napier that his most devoted fans understand intuitively. This man did not get into television to become famous. He got into television because a producer saw his wife's blog and offered them an opportunity to save the town they loved. Fame was never the goal. Fame was the accidental byproduct of something genuine. And when that accidental byproduct started threatening the very thing it was supposed to serve, his family, his home, his sense of self, Ben did what any truly strong man eventually does. He stopped. He drew a line in the sawdust. And he said, enough. But what happened after that moment of refusal? What did Ben do next? And more importantly, what did he say that made even his harshest critics go completely silent? The answer is coming. And it's more powerful than anything you've heard so far. Here's something the internet never tells you. The most powerful comeback isn't the loudest one. It isn't the dramatic press conference. It isn't the tearful tell-all interview. It isn't the carefully managed PR campaign designed to repair a damaged image. The most powerful comeback is the quiet one. The one where a man simply decides on his own terms, in his own time, exactly who he is going to be. And then becomes that person so completely that no rumor, no speculation, and no amount of online noise can touch him. That is exactly what Ben Napier did. After the turbulence, after the health battles, after the identity crisis, after the behind-the-scenes negotiations and the boundary drawing and the quiet but unmistakable fracturing of the carefully constructed world that hometown had built around him, Ben Napier came back. Not as a television star fighting to stay relevant. Not as a brand protecting its market share. But as a man. A real, grounded, imperfect, deeply human man who had walked through fire and come out the other side knowing exactly what mattered. And the first thing he did? He went back to his woodworking shop. Not for a camera. Not for a segment. Not for content. Just for himself. Just to feel the wood under his hands again. To hear the familiar sound of tools working against grain. To exist quietly and completely in the one place where Ben Napier had always been most fully himself. And then he started talking. Not in the polished, carefully edited way that television trains you to speak, but honestly, vulnerably, in the raw, unfiltered way that only a man who has genuinely reckoned with himself can manage. He talked about his health journey with a level of openness that surprised everyone. He didn't dress it up. He didn't make it inspirational content. He just told the truth. He had been unhealthy. He had been scared. He had made changes, real, difficult, unglamorous changes, because his daughter deserved a father who would be around for a long time. He talked about Laurel, about how the town that the show had transformed was now genuinely thriving in ways that went far beyond tourism. New businesses, returning residents, young people choosing to stay instead of leave, a community that had rediscovered its own worth. And he gave credit quietly, without fanfare, to every single person in that town who had done the actual work. Not the cameras, not the network, not the television magic, the people. But it was one particular moment that silenced everyone. In an interview that circulated widely among hometown fans, Ben was asked directly about the rumors, about the tension, about whether the show and everything surrounding it had broken something in him that couldn't be fixed. He paused. That long, thoughtful pause that people who know Ben recognize immediately. The pause that means he's about to say something real. And then he said something that nobody expected. He said that the hardest thing about the last few years wasn't the health problems. It wasn't the pressure of fame. It wasn't even the identity crisis, as real and as painful as that had been. The hardest thing was learning to receive. He had spent his entire life as the strong one, the provider, the fixer, the man who built things and solved problems and held everything together. And somewhere in the middle of all that chaos, in the middle of doctor's appointments and contract negotiations and sleepless nights wondering if he was losing himself, someone had to hold him up for once. And that person was Aaron. Always Aaron. He talked about his wife with the kind of reverence that you simply cannot manufacture. This wasn't television warmth. This wasn't the choreographed affection of two people performing a relationship for ratings. This was a man talking about the person who saved him. He said Aaron never let him disappear into the version of himself that fame was trying to create. Every time he started drifting, every time the pressure and the performance started pulling him away from who he really was, she pulled him back. Not dramatically, not with grand gestures, just by knowing him, just by loving the real Ben Napier so consistently and so completely that the fake version never had enough room to take root. And when he said that, when those words came out of this giant, quiet, sawdust-covered man who had built his entire public identity on strength and steadiness, something shifted in the room. Because everyone watching understood. This wasn't a story about fame and its consequences. This was a love story. A story about a man who almost lost himself, and a woman who never let that happen. So where does Ben Napier stand today? He is still in Laurel, Mississippi. Still in the woodworking shop, still raising his daughters, still walking through the streets of the town that his family helped resurrect, not as a television star performing authenticity, but as an actual neighbor, an actual community member, an actual human being who chose roots over reach and depth over fame every single time it came down to a choice. Hometown continues, but on Ben's terms now, with the boundaries he fought for, with the life he refused to surrender completely to a network schedule. And perhaps most importantly, with the version of himself that he almost lost but never quite let go. Here's the thought that lingers long after you stop watching. In a world that constantly tells us that more is better, that bigger is better, that fame and reach and platform are the ultimate measures of a life well lived, Ben Napier chose small. He chose Laurel. He chose his workshop. He chose Tuesday mornings with his daughters and quiet evenings with his wife and the particular satisfaction of building something with his hands that will outlast every camera that ever pointed at his face. He chose himself. And in doing so, in refusing to become the thing that fame wanted him to be, Ben Napier became something far more rare and far more valuable than any television star. He became a man who actually knew who he was. In the end, that might be the most remarkable thing he ever built.